Good morning. I'm Lisa Grayson, Deputy Director of the New York City Accelerator, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, LL97 Compliance Year and Requirements. The goal of this webinar is to review compliance and submission requirements for your LL97 filing and to ensure that you understand all requirements to complete your filing and to allow enough time to cover the various aspects of the filing that may take longer than you may anticipate. We also want to make sure that you're aware of and take advantage of certain opportunities such as the Beneficial Electrification Credit. Holly Savoia, Director of Sustainability Outreach and Assistance for the New York City Department of Buildings, will be our featured speaker. I'll provide a brief overview of the accelerator and the services that we provide to help your buildings energy efficiency and decarbonization projects, as well as to help you with your filing process. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. The presentation is being recorded and will be distributed following the webinar, so you'll get the recording and the PowerPoint slides. You can add your questions to the Q&A Zoom tab on the screen, and we'll do our best to answer them during the presentation in real time. If we don't get to all the questions, we'll take some at the end, but if we don't get to all of them, we'll follow up after the presentation in a written format and get those out. Please note that your technical questions or property-specific questions should be sent to the BEAM email address on the slide. And all your reporting questions are most likely answered in the DOB FAQ, which will link as well and make that available to you. And again, please make good use of the Q&A section. And without further delay, I'd like to introduce Holly and let her take it from here. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my slides? Lisa, can you see my slides?
Yes, I can see them. Yes, yes, I can.
Okay, very good. Good morning. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We are in the home stretch at this point, so we are thought that today we would discuss a little bit about some of the questions that we get, some of the things that we find people are finding a little tricky, and go over some of the basic tenets of the law, reiterate what those are, and take you through some of the things that you can avail yourselves of at this point in time. Okay, so for most of you, I think you understand what Local Law 97 covers in terms of building size, 25,000, over 25,000 square feet, 2 or more buildings, over 50,000. So we're going to start with the timeline. So when I'm talking about the timeline, I'm going to talk about it both in terms of what it is in the law and the rule, and also some of the changes that we've had for this year. So you see on this timeline, we have the initial reporting date of May 1st, and then there was a general reporting period that took place until until 6/30, which gives you a grace period of 60 days. And then on 6/30, in a normal year, that would be the deadline for which you have to submit your Local Law 84 and Local Law 97, and this year Local Law 88 reports, if you do not have an extension. If you have an extension on a normal year, that would give you until August 29th to report. And also that would be the deadline for when you, this year, for when you had to request an extension for Local Law 97. And that extension would also extend to Local Law 84 and Local Law 88. Local Law 84 at this point would have had to have been submitted by August 29th, but Local Law 88 and Local Law 97, if you have the extension, are due at the end of this year. And so we find ourselves here in this last home stretch from August 29th until the end of the year, when we would be expecting your reports for 88 and 97. So just to reiterate, in a normal year of compliance, the reports are due May 1st with a grace period through June 30th, where you can submit the report up until June 30th without penalty. Those reports that are submitted for Article 320 after that date would incur a 50 cent per square foot penalty for each month after May 1st. And then for Article 321, there would be a penalty for non-submittal and for non-compliance, because if you don't submit, we don't know that you're in compliance. And then also, just a point that we want to reiterate is that non-compliant reports that are submitted after the end of the grace period that aren't pursuing penalty mitigation will incur fines both for a late submission and for non-compliance. And you can submit your deadline extension requests until June 30th in a normal year if the RDP needs more time, or if you're in a pending dispute with DOF about challenging your inclusion on the covered buildings list. So again, this year we had, it's the first year of reporting, so there's a little bit more leniency, and we gave you until August 29th to submit your extension requests, and that gives you until the end of the year to submit your actual reports. However, we are still accepting extension requests at this point in time. So I just want to reiterate that you can still submit your extension request. Some of the things that we find is a confusion that people have between Local Law 84, 87, and 97. And all of these work together. So we want to reiterate that, but they all have a different definition for what a covered building is in terms of the square footage threshold for when you have more than one building on a lot. So just to review, Local Law 84 is benchmarking. We have a lot of people saying, no, I complied with Local Law 97. What they're talking about is they're talking about Local Law 84. So it's important to make sure that building owners understand that Local Law 84 is not Local Law 97. It works in concert with Local Law 97, but it is not Local Law 97. So there are some buildings that are on the Local Law 97, most buildings that are on the Local Law 97 CBL that do have to comply with Local Law 84, but there are some that are not. So if you are on the list for 97 and you're not on the list for Local Law 84, you still have to do your benchmarking because it's a requirement for Article 320 buildings and Article 321 buildings that are complying with the 2030 emissions limits to do benchmarking in order to submit your 97 report. So that's an important thing that we need to make sure that building owners understand. Local Law 88 is something that I think is not getting as much attention with building owners. That's the lighting upgrades and the submetering. If you have to comply with Local Law 97, you really need to check the Local Law 88 CBL to see if you need to comply with this law as well. And this presentation will be distributed, and all of these links should be active. If, however, they are not active, you can find all of these links on our main sustainability webpage. And I have a link to that as well down here at the bottom of the slide. Okay, so then we get to Local Law 97. The difference is there are some buildings that have to comply right from 2024 with their first reporting year this year. Some don't have to comply until 2026, and others not until 2035. And then the Article 321 buildings only have to comply this year, and then they're done. If you are one of these buildings that have to comply in 2026 and 2035, and you have to comply with Local Law 88, your Local Law 88 reports were due this year. So if you haven't gotten those in, send them as soon as you can. And it is important for you to check the covered buildings list for each of these laws. Okay, one other thing to reiterate is the building level compliance. I know we've probably said this, ad nauseum for many of you, but the submission of the reports and the issuance of penalties does take place at the level of an individual building or BIN, as we refer to it, and BIN stands for Building Information Number. Again, eligibility for adjustments and exceptions apply to the individual buildings, not to the entire lots. So you may have one building that has an exemption while other buildings on the lot do not. Okay. What I have here is just an excerpt of the covered buildings list. So I want to just go over some of the compliance pathways. And one of the things that um, we get some questions on is you can see up here that sometimes there's a lot, a BBL that has more than one bin on it or only one bin, and they have two different compliance pathways. So up at the top of the CBL, you'll see the different compliance pathways, CP 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you go to the covered building list, you find your BBL and you see that there are multiple bins, meaning DOF's understanding, Department of Finance's understanding is that there are more than one building on the lot. It is the responsibility of the registered design professional to determine which buildings on that lot comply with which pathway if multiple ones are listed on the CBL. If you only have one building on your lot and there are multiple pathways that are crossed off, what you need to do is you need to comply with the highest numbered pathway. So, for example, if you have a BBL, one bin, and you have two compliance pathways of CP0 and CP2, CP2 is going to be the higher tier. That's what you will comply with. And where you have uncertainty, you can always check the CBL matrix. The difference between the compliance on an annual basis starting now and starting in later years often has to do with the affordability status of the dwelling units in the building. So the CBL matrix will make that more clear for you. And again, there's a link to it on this slide, but you can also see it on our main webpage. Okay. Just to reiterate, because we do still get questions about this. Sometimes there are buildings on a lot that are non-covered buildings, even though they are all pulled onto the CBL. So again, we reviewed that it's one building on a lot that's greater than 25,000 or multiple buildings greater than 50,000 square feet. But if even one building on the lot is over 25,000 gross square feet, the entire lot is going to be pulled into the CBL. So in this example, you have three buildings. One building is 26,000 gross square feet, while the other two buildings are both 10,000 gross square feet. If you add all those together, they're only 46,000 square feet. That's less than 50, which means that only the building that's over 25,000 square feet, or in this case, building number one, is the one that needs to comply. The other two are considered non-covered buildings. Let's take the same example, except building number two is 15,000 gross square feet for whatever reason. We had an addition or it was always like that. You now have three buildings on the lot that have an aggregate square footage of over 50,000 square feet. So the building was pulled, the lot was pulled onto the CBL because their aggregate square footage of the three buildings is greater than 50,000, plus there's one building that's greater than 25,000. So in this case, all of these buildings are considered covered buildings, even though building two is only 15,000 gross square feet and building three is only 10,000 gross square feet. So people also ask, when do you do a combined report? So you can do a combined report only when the two buildings have the same building owner and they follow the same compliance pathway. So in this situation, you have four buildings that are on the lot. The first building is an Article 320 typical pathway. The second building is actually a non a building that you would not report to the DOB. There's no report required for that because it is a city building. And then buildings 3 and 4 are both Article 321 buildings. So here's a situation where you have multiple buildings on the lot. They have different pathways, but two of them are the same pathway. In this situation, they're sharing an energy service, but they don't need to do that if they're doing a combined report. But if they are sharing an energy service, they can then demonstrate the aggregate compliance for those two buildings together. Okay, as opposed to when those two buildings might be sharing a shared system, but they are not on the same compliance pathway, or they're not owned by the same owner. In that case, the total consumption of the shared energy type has to be mathematically apportioned between the two buildings. And the methodology is being left to the determination of the RDP, and it has to be the same, for all buildings within the group. So in this case, they are sharing a natural gas meter, but they're not sharing a utility meter. They're submetered for electricity, but they are sharing natural gas. So in that case, if they are two different pathways, they have to be mathematically apportioned. So that's the difference between those two situations. We've recently added some information because we've gotten, a lot of buildings that say, oh, well, I've read that if I'm a new building, I don't have to comply because I don't have my first TCO. And, in many situations, that's correct. Um, we have added this chart or table to our web page, but basically it will tell you that if a building's has recently or is currently undergoing a purchase or renovation, um, any change in ownership, if there's a full demolition, if it's a new building, the different types of alterations, and then if there's a BBL change, it'll tell you what actions required and what the implication is. So in most situations, you'll see that you have to submit a ticket number 1, which is a CBL dispute. Okay, I wanted to just once again point you to the information and filing guides for Article 320 and Article 321. These are incredibly helpful. They will explain a lot of the situations that we get questions for. And often when we answer those questions, we point you to these guides because um, they are really helpful for you. So they are found on our main webpage, and you can take a look at them. We also have links to the law itself and the rules for each of these. And I just wanted to just show you a snapshot of our main webpage because you can get to any of our local laws, all the ones that we mentioned that work together, 84, 88, 97. Can all be, navigated to from our main sustainability page. So if you go to the New York City building site and you go to codes, then to sustainability, you'll get this site. In the middle of the page, it has all of the local laws that you would need to get to, and as well as on the left-hand navigation bar. So you can go back and forth between the laws. Again, checking the CBLs for 84, 88, 87, and 97. Also on the web page are a, a a ton of user guides. So you can have, we have the user guide for the compliance report submission process. We have the DOB Now user guide that tells you how to set up an account and how to make payments for the various submissions that you're going to make, whether it's an extension request or a report submission. We have the ESPM user guide so that you can have information about, uploading your benchmarking and sharing it with Beam, which Beam is the third platform. The Beam user guide, a lot of information about how to navigate through the Beam portal. A new thing is our inventory column definitions, which will, at the property level and the tax level, it will give you a lot of information about what those, what's included in those. For a CBL dispute, if you want to submit a CBL dispute, there's a user guide for that. There's a user guide for an extension request, an Article 320 simple building submission, the 321 user guide, and then also penalty mitigation, which we will discuss, as well as Local Law 88 user guides. And then, as we just talked about, the combined reporting user guide. So I encourage everyone, take a look at those, and as well as there are live presentations that we recorded earlier in the year. Those are also, very helpful if if you're confused about how to do something like this. Okay, so let's move on to deductions. You're at the point where you have put the report together and you're, over. So let's discuss some of the things that you can look at. So on-site energy storage, of course, there are sites that will take advantage of that deduction. Uh, More applicable, I think, to more buildings is the beneficial electrification deduction. These are taken against the total emissions, as opposed to RECs and on-site solar. We're going to defer discussion about RECs because they are not yet available. And we'll discuss those at a later date once they do become available. Okay, so for beneficial electrification, what we want to make sure that people know is that if you have installed heat pumps that replace fossil fuel equipment, the any of the electricity usage that is due to the use of that equipment um, during this period, up until, if it was installed up until 2027, takes a double emissions reduction. So normally your electricity, you have to apply the coefficient that's associated with electricity for this reporting period of 2024 through 2029. What you would do in this case, if you have any of the electricity that's attributable to those heat pumps, would be double the electrification credit in the negative. So it's really important that you understand that if you install those heat pumps, whether you're installing them, if you've already installed them, that you make sure that you are you're taking advantage of that double emissions credit at this point. You can still install them during this home stretch. It won't count for this year. It'll count going forward, but you can, up through next year, any of the equipment that you install will be double that. You'll be able to take double that credit. So earlier is more beneficial to you when it comes to beneficial electrification. And this is just a chart. Many of you have seen this before, but again, the savings is twice as large for equipment installed prior to 2027. And it just shows you that any of the years in which the qualifying equipment was first installed, what years it can be applied in. And obviously there are more years you can apply this in the earlier that you do it. As we get down to 2028 and 2029, of course, there are fewer years in which the credit can be applied. Okay, so I think it's important just to review the enforcement framework, especially for those who are, just hearing about Local Law 97, it's really important that they get an extension request in as soon as possible because the penalties, are significant. And so just reviewing for Article 320 buildings, if you are, failed to file or you are over your limit, a notice of violation would be um, issued. You can either pay the penalty or you can go to court and argue your case. Or you can apply for mediated resolution. And in this case, mediated resolution is an agreement with the DOB in terms of how you will be mediating your situation such that you can comply. Um, and in that case, you would just then go on to submit your next annual emissions report in accordance with this resolution. If you're not in compliance with it, the DOB does have the ability to issue back penalties. Okay, so part of it's important just to review the two main responsibilities. So you do have to submit your report. Um, the thing I always try to make sure people understand is that submitting a report that's not in compliance is probably far better for you than if you if you don't submit a report at all. Um, or late, because your penalty for not submitting the report is 50 cents per square foot per month. And while most of these buildings are over 25,000 square feet, you're talking about a minimum penalty of $12,500 a month. That is very large. So, as opposed to a penalty for being over your limit, which is $268 per ton, and that's an annual um, penalty. So you have to do the math for your building, but those are your two main compliance responsibilities. Getting back to if you are over your limit and you want to enter into penalty mitigation for this first compliance period, there are two ways. Obviously, for an unexpected or unforeseeable event like a fire or flood where your building just is out of commission, or through penalty mitigation and mediated resolution, you can go into looking at good faith efforts. And just to reiterate again, in order to go down the path of good faith effort, you would have to submit your report that shows your, over your compliance rate. You have to have completed your benchmarking and you have to have completed your local law 88. Once you've done all of those things, you do have to do one of the things on the right. So either a decarbonization plan has to be submitted. You can submit a completed application for work approved by the DOB that says, we're undergoing, work is underway, and that's going to bring us into our limits. You can be building out for electrification readiness. Um, you can in future years, you can show compliance with previous years, and or you can be a critical facility. Okay, and this is just talking about the decarbonization plan. If you go that route, there are two checks. May 1st of 2027, you have to substantiate that the work that the building has already done by that point in time will get you into meeting the 2024 to 2029 emissions limits. The following year, you have to show that there are existing department approved work filings that would get you into meeting the 2030 to 2034 emissions limits. And again, if you don't achieve your decarbonization plan results, it could lead to retroactive penalties. And then just the rest of the slide just talks about the energy audits that are necessary for the different size buildings, less than 50,000 or greater than equal to 50,000, being a level 1 or level 2 energy audit. Okay, so let's also talk about the offsets. The law allows for offsets up to 10% of a building's annual emissions limit. So um, this is a good avenue for buildings that are very close to meeting their limit, but they're just, less than 10% over, they can take advantage of buying the offsets, which would allow them to become a compliant building. It's the same cost as paying a penalty, but your compliance um, status is now in compliance rather than out of compliance. It's also a good option for Article 321 buildings that are looking to comply with the 2030 limits. They can also buy offsets. Okay, so how does the offset program work? So for your 320 buildings and your 321 buildings that are looking to comply with the 2030 limits, you pay the same amount as you would be for a penalty for per ton of CO2 equivalent over the limit. It's $268, and it goes into an affordable housing reinvestment fund. That fund then funds projects in 321 buildings and buildings that are under 25,000 square feet. And they are able to then do projects in those buildings that produce a heat pump installation or electrification projects. There, there is a guide for this on our website, and I've linked it here as well. It's a user guide for deductions and alternatives. That's in addition to the guides that also that I've posted earlier on in the presentation. And then there's a template for deductions and alternatives ticket in Beam, so it can allow you to play around in there for what you might want to take advantage of. And then there's a general link to the Affordable Housing Reinvestment Fund offsets program. Okay. There are also there are also adjustments. So there's the external constraint adjustment that is for 3 years, and that's due to things like another provision of law or a physical condition of the building. There is or there's a financial constraint which is good for 1 year. And there are qualifying standards for co-ops and condos, nonprofits, affordable housing, or those with no debt, and then all other buildings. Um, and there is a user guide for this also on our webpage. So there's an application for the 320.7 adjustment for Article 320 and Article 320 buildings, and the New York City Accelerator has guides for this as well, also on our website, and that is the adjustment guide for 320 buildings and the adjustment guide for 321 buildings. So a lot of guides on our website. So I do encourage you to go there and take a look at it. Just before we move on from this slide, I just want to reiterate that there are requirements for applying for these adjustments. You have to work with the New York City Accelerator, and you also have to have proof that you have taken advantage of purchasing the maximum amount of offsets that are available.
And Holly, while you're pausing for a second, we're going to switch out the presentation because we're getting some complaints that it's very blurry. So hold for a second. Larissa's going to switch out the presentation, put up a different version, and hopefully it'll be more clear for participants. All right, looks like we've done that, so you can proceed. Thank you.
Should I stop sharing?
Nope, you're good. It looks like a much better quality. I think it's crystal clear according to the report, so we're good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I just wanted to reiterate the 321 compliance pathways because I think, some 321 buildings don't understand that there is both the performance-based pathway, and the prescriptive pathway. So the performance-based pathway is where you're complying with the emissions limits for 2030 now. If you are, a very efficient building, it's a good way to go. Again, you can avail yourself of the affordable housing uh, investment credit. And then there is the prescriptive pathway, which is more commonly known, where you are installing the 13 prescriptive energy conservation measures. And these are the 13 measures. The four that are highlighted are the ones that require more detailed documentation and inspections. The rest require an attestation by a professional. Okay. One of the things that I wanted to stress is the houses of worship. Um, there, there are some houses of worship that are listed on the covered buildings list as an Article 320 building. So one of the things you want to make sure, working with your design professional, is that you are on the right pathway. Um, to qualify as a house of worship, your main use or dominant occupancy has to be a three religious house of worship, which means that greater than 50% of the building has to be used as assembly space for religious purposes. So, to confirm the house of worship, it's described in the CBL FAQ, which again is on our website. And it does require an RDP to certify the floor area measurements. So just showing you our covered buildings list, CBL FAQs, and if in the drop down about houses of worship, it shows you more information, but also a good reference. Okay, and then just reviewing the Article 321 penalty framework. Again, there's a penalty for not submitting the report, but then there's also a penalty for not demonstrating compliance. If you don't submit your report, you can't demonstrate that you're in compliance. So you can do the math in terms of what those penalties would amount to, and they can be assessed until you meet compliance. So again, unexpected or unforeseeable event is a way for Article 321 properties to enter into penalty mitigation, to pursue penalty mitigation. You could also be, taking part in an eligible energy conservation project, and you also can enter into mediated resolution with the department. Okay, so discussing mediated resolution specifically with respect to Article 321 buildings, this is an option for buildings who are demonstrating that they're making diligent efforts, but they just need more time. So it's a good avenue if you're an Article 321 building that just discovered that you have to comply with you know Local Law 97. You should consider looking into this. We want building owners to understand that this is an option for them. And um, again, if they're going for the 2030 limits, that mediated resolution would say, how the building is going to comply with the 2030 limits by 2030. And then for the PECMs, those measures would have to be completed expeditiously, including, which vendors are responsible, but they would not have to be completed by the end of the year. Okay. We wanted to review some of the things we've started reviewing the Article 321 prescriptive pathway reports, and we wanted to just, give you an outline of some of the common errors that we're seeing, so that if you haven't filed these already, you can be aware of them. In general, the PECM workbooks for those four PECMs that need to have some more documentation, they they have to be filled out completely. We're getting workbooks that are just incomplete, and you're definitely going to, as the audits progress, they're going to be sent back to you because they're not filled out completely. Generally, also, if you're submitting that the property has engaged in a utility program to complete some of these measures, you have to show not that applied for this position, this program, but that you completed the program so that these measures were completed. So we need to see documentation of that. Specifically for PCM number 4, the radiator temperature controls, people are submitting that there's an initial survey that has happened, but they haven't submitted. Sometimes that initial survey isn't complete, um, but also that the final survey hasn't been done or isn't complete. So we need to see that the initial and the final survey have been completed. For PECM number 7, the indoor sensors one, um, people are supplying screenshots. That's great, except they're just a picture. We need some identifying information that links the picture to a particular building. So BBL, a bin, address, some kind of identifying information. For PCM number 8, the steam trap repair replacement. In what it says is that the temperature difference has to be less than you have to measure the temperature difference, and when it's less than 30 degrees temperature difference, it doesn't meet the criteria. So you cannot select the drop down that says that the retro commissioning agent has confirmed the 30-degree temperature difference between the main supply and the main return if it doesn't meet that. So please be aware of that. If that is less than 30 degrees, it doesn't meet the criteria, you cannot select that option. And for PECM number 9, for the steam loop schematic diagrams, it has to indicate what the condition of the vent is and also the date of the test. So those things are important. Okay, couple more slides. Your checklist, if you haven't submitted an extension request, you should do that now. You should check the CBL to see that the bins are listed, the number of bins that are there, and the compliance pathways. Make sure that you agree with them. Check the CBL matrix. Um, determine your pathway. Building owners should hire professionals if they haven't already. Service providers, you should, make sure that anyone you're working with is on top of things and that they're progressing. Um, if you haven't done your benchmarking, you have to submit your benchmarking for your buildings. If you're doing Article 320 or you're doing Article 321, 2030 limits, you need the benchmarking to kind of show, um, you know, not to kind of show, but to show what your usage is. Um, understand what's involved with penalty mitigation and mediated resolution. It's really important. It's an avenue for compliance. Number 7, familiarize yourself with the various means by which your emissions can be reduced, and discuss that with your RDP. We talked about some of them. If you've installed, some beneficial electrification measures, make sure you're taking that deduction. If you have solar, make sure you're taking that deduction. If you want to buy offsets, make sure you're doing that. Don't forget about Local Law 88. It's very important. I think people are forgetting about it. Know your deadlines, know the associated penalties for missing these deadlines. Ask for help. New York City Accelerator is there and DOB is there. You can send questions to Beam. We have the email address for that, for the help desk in Beam. We are very caught up with our questions and our answers. So again, we have a lot greater bandwidth to answer your questions now than we will December 20th, 21st through the 30th, because we'll be, a lot more busy then. And, just in general, work backwards from the submission deadline. Pay your submission fees in advance. Believe me, we don't get any commission if you pay those in advance, but it will help you, because if you have an issue, you can straighten it out now rather than when you're, interested in submitting your reports and you can't do so because you have a submission fee issue. A lot of the questions for, submitting your things are answered in our FAQ for the LL97 processing FAQ on our website. Check that out. And I just wanted to go over a review of the reporting steps, because we've been telling people submit your extension, but before you submit an extension, you have to go into DOB Now Safety and pay for the extension. Even if you are a fee exempt building, you have to go in there and go through the steps to get a confirmation number, even if you're not paying, so that you can go into Beam and submit the extension request. For those of you who have paid for an extension request and haven't submitted your actual extension request, please go do that now. And for the Article 321, 320 buildings and the 321 complying with 2030, there's also the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. Make sure your benchmarking is in and done. And with that, I think we can end.
Great. Thank you so much, Holly, and thanks everybody for joining today. We appreciate all the great information, and hopefully it looks like we answered all the questions in the Q&A. So Beth, thank you for staying on top of that so promptly. We will assemble the questions as well as a recording of the session and the PowerPoint slides and distribute it to all the attendees. So again, thank you all very much, and good luck and happy filing. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.